For 16 years, our next guest served as Tennessee's 3rd District Congressional Representative. And of course, that can only be the one and only Zach Wamp. Zach, good to see you again.
Hey, Chip.
Appreciate you joining us. Today, obviously, a very seminal moment in American history. It's the 23rd anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. I want to find out where you were when you got the news about what was happening.
I was in my office in the Cannon House office building on Capitol Hill. My 6th year, I was kind of in the zone, and someone in my office said a plane just hit a building in New York City. And that didn't really cause the alarm until the 2nd plane hit, and then they said a 2nd plane had hit. Helen Hardin was my chief of staff. She's got a long history here at this station. She said, we're supposed to evacuate, and I didn't know that all the members had an evacuation plan. And like several people I lived with in a house, members of Congress, their staff's evacuation plan took us all to the same place. But I was in D.C., it happened, and man, I can remember the sounds, the emotion, the smell of fuel after the Pentagon got hit coming across the Potomac River. I walked down to the mall to make sure the Capitol hadn't been hit and then ran back to tell everybody about it. It was traumatic, like nothing I'd ever been through in my life.
You, back then, were on a different level than most of us, and while what happened definitely was a shock, was it a surprise?
It was a surprise. And one of the beautiful things that came out of it is we were really unified for a period of time as a nation, and then that went away again. And that's sad to me. But I was surprised that that happened, especially with those crude instruments, that you could actually bring a country to its knees temporarily. We got back up, but we went to our knees that day with a bunch of crude instruments thinking, are we this vulnerable? Because in a mass transit, like air travel was our vulnerability, and they figured it out. And
right.
they were able to hit us really hard, but they didn't destroy us, they just knocked us down.
It seemed like everybody, as you mentioned a moment ago, was unified for a while, and then that fell apart. Your party and the Democratic Party kind of unified that night on the steps of the Capitol. Tell me about that.
Yeah, and we sang God Bless America, and we were all really still full of adrenaline, but also fear, anxiety. And I remember asking the Sergeant-at-Arms if I could get in the house gym because everything was shut down. And back then we didn't have even Blackberries, let alone iPhones. Our phones were all still down. The networks were down. And I was a runner back then. I wanted to go for a run. And I went to the gym and I changed clothes and I went for a long run all the way down past the White House and into Georgetown. I ran like 8 or 10 miles right as the sun was setting. And it was like a zombie movie. There was nobody out. There were sirens in the background, but it was a ghost town in Washington, D.C. And on that run, I had all these deep reflections in my life about my mortality, things I wanted to do in my life, because that was the first day in my life I'd ever come to grips with death.
If you had been the commander-in-chief on that day, what would you have said to America?
Well, that freedom is not free, and that it's also very fragile, and that the republic today, even with our ability to have a free election and peacefully transfer power, these are questions, actually. Can people govern themselves? And so we have enemies, but the enemies are not each other, our neighbors, our friends, even our political opponents. The enemies are in other places, and they don't like the way we do business. And those are our real enemies, and we need to focus on that as a people. But I think, frankly, President Bush, he handled that pretty well. Bush 43. I mean, that pitch he threw strike at Yankee Stadium with a bulletproof vest on to show the country that we could still fight and come together. Man, that was powerful.
It certainly was. Zach, we got to leave it there. Thanks, as always, for your time. We appreciate you stopping by. Stick around. We're back with more after this.